Can you turn it to more slow? Yeah. Put it on and then I'll is that doing something? Yeah. No, it's still running.
Hello everybody. Hands up if you were at the last session. Okay, a whole new audience. That's amazing. That's fantastic. We're going to touch on some of the issues, so you'll see what you missed. But at the same time, it's a whole new conversation. I'm just going to reintroduce myself because most of you won't know me therefore. I'm Finlo. I am the editor of the UK's land use news channel called 8.9. That's number 8, the word point, the number 9.com. So we cover everything from land, not just farming, not just food, not just natural capital, a whole range of different things. I also produce the Farm Gate podcast. And I just sort of stop for a moment so that you can make a mental note or a phone note of that so that you can subscribe. That's the Farm Gate podcast where we talk about lots of the issues that we're going to be touching on today. Before that, I was the chief executive of a think tank called Farmwell. Did lots of work with government, particularly around agriculture and greenhouse gases, which isn't directly relevant to this conversation, but it's vaguely interesting anyway. Look, if we want to make healthcare affordable in Britain, if we want to bring down the costs of running the NHS and ensure that the services that we have remain free at the point of delivery, then we need to tackle food, we need to tackle where food comes from, in other words, the soil, the living system that it comes from. We need to tackle people's diets, and we need to tackle lifestyle. And it is, I was going to say estimated, but actually it's analysed and assessed that the cost of unhealthy food, of Britain's unhealthy food system, is £268 billion per year, almost equivalent to the annual UK health spend, which is something like £290 billion a year. Ultra-processed foods are not the only villain, but they are one of the big villains in the system, designed to appeal to us directly. Anybody who has kids will know about this, from pot noodle to crunchy bars to whatever else. It's all these things that are designed to appeal to our taste buds and our pleasure sensors, and these ultra-processed cereals and ready meals, snacks, drinks, confectionery, all of this stuff that people use just to fill themselves up or give themselves a bit more energy. But they're causing diet-related ill health, including chronic disease. They're contributing enormously to the cost of social care, welfare spending, productivity losses, and when I say that, sort of sick days and lost productivity within the economy. So the cost to the economy is enormous of these things, and yet government continues to support them, people continue to buy them, and we just don't understand the impact that they're having on our society. I'm joined by 4 amazing panellists, and I hope you'll join me in welcoming them. We've got Dr. Sue Beckers from the Real Food Rebellion, Barbara Cossins from Love Local, Trust Local, Claire King from the Nutrition Advisory Team, and Helen Ross from the Well Life Lab. This is not a subject that I know inside out and back to front, so I'm going to be really excited about learning these things as we go along as well. Sue, you've been a GP for 30 years. How does ultra-processed food drive chronic disease, please? And just bear in mind that you need to have an unhealthily close relationship with the microphone for it to work. It needs to be about 3 inches from your mouth.
Okay, I'm just going to try and get this.
Hi. Hi. I was a GP locally, and it's lovely to be here, and I'm very glad I was. Thank you very much for asking me to be on the panel. But ultra-processed food is a term that's actually only being researched. I mean, as a research subject, it's only been researched in the last 10 years. It's actually quite a new term. 25 years ago, I was a GP, but I was also doing a master's degree in nutrition. And then we were asking ourselves why people were getting sicker, why there was so much obesity, why the diabetes was on the rise, even then. And we couldn't quite put our finger on it then. But the research what I did learn then was that research into food is difficult. It can't often prove things because you can't stick people, they're not like laboratory rats, you can't put them into a cage and just feed them for years and not let them have anything else. So all you can do is point to associations, and that's produced a lot of confusion amongst everybody. We're all not quite clear about the truth behind what we eat, and it's actually muddied the water considerably. There are loads of diets around the world that work. There are vegetarian diets, there are carnivore diets, there are lots of mixed diets, and they work very well. But they all have one thing in common, and that is that they have real food at their core. And we were watching 25 years ago when I was feeding my children with packed lunches, and we were watching these funny things come on board, and you'll have remembered all these plastic packets with bright colours, packaging and lots of promises, and there were sort of cheese strings, and there were funny fruit swirls, and there were lots of puffs made from sort of taste products and things, and they were all very exciting, and you didn't want to kind of deny the children to taste them. But in fact, in 2009, it was Carlos Monteiro from Brazil who said, no, these things are different. They're different from real food. And he very cleverly divided foods up into the NOVA classification. So he said, look, you've got one is your real foods, or your fruit and vegetables, your meat, your fish, your dairy, whatever. And then you've got your culinary. Group 2 is your culinary things, your oil, your salt, your sugar, your fats that you cook with. Group 3 is when you combine those two and you get your traditional food. So you get your bread, you get your cheese, you get your salted fish, you get your ways of preserving meat. And group 4 is different because this has been produced by the food manufacturers, and the key is that group 4 is for profit. Group 4, they want to produce these foods really cheaply, and so they choose really cheap ingredients, often subsidised farm products from America, and they want to compete with each other, so they make it cheap, but they make it deliberately very tasty. They mass produce food, and the key is that they do this for their shareholders. They're not doing it for us. So I do a little teaching program. I'm involved with a public health collaboration charity, and we're producing a teaching program for 6 to 7-year-olds. So start them young, and it's to help them know the difference between real food and ultra-processed food. And what we're saying to these little tiny children, we never say ultra-processed food. They wouldn't know what we were talking about. So we just say, well, there's real food, comes from a farm, a field, a tree, or the sea. And then there's the food that's made up in a factory. And what does that food look like? It looks like you take real food, you pull it apart, you might get rid of some quite useful bits. You mash it up or change parts of it, and then you put it back together with things that we don't need, but the food manufacturers need it to make the food taste and feel like real food. So that's how we explained it to them, and we sort of showed them a car that's being pulled apart and mashed up and then put back together. It's not what's in the food that's the problem, it's actually what they've done to the food. That's important because they keep trying to point us to fat and sugar and salt and whatever, but actually it's this process of pulling it apart and mashing it up that has actually given us the problem, because we now don't have the matrix of food. You don't bite into an apple and munch and crunch it. Your body doesn't understand the food because it's used to it being eaten in a certain way, digested slowly, and giving us the nutrients that we need from a whole food. And it doesn't work well with this new kind of Frankenstein food that's been produced.
Lovely, thank you. Great introduction for us there. I just want to say that we're going to try and talk for about 40 minutes or so, something along those lines, and try and constrain ourselves vaguely around that time. If people have questions, it's then over to you as an audience for the questions that you have, so that you can direct us to the stuff that you're most interested in. So if you can feel that you've got a question coming, sort of try and draw it out a little bit, so that when we get to that chance in sort of 35 minutes time or so, you'll be able to put your point or ask your question. So I wonder if we can sort of dwell on your time as a GP a little bit. I'm wondering about the health trends that you've observed over the course of your time in the surgery, and also just explain to us a little bit about why ultra-processed food affects human health.
Yes, yeah. Well, thank you. So I was a GP with my husband for 30 years, and we saw this extraordinary growth of problems in our patients, which people couldn't actually explain. And one of them was actually blood pressure, essential hypertension. Why is it called essential hypertension? Because actually they don't know what causes it. Well, we do now. We know that a lot of it is actually driven by the insulin that we are all producing in order to deal with the massive amounts of carbohydrate and sugar that we're having in our diets and the way that it's being processed. And so if you go on a lower carb, real food diet, and if you're on blood pressure tablets now and you try it, you may well have to come off your blood pressure tablets. There's a little medical warning there. And I'm not trying to be your GP, because I've got medical disclaimer. So that was just one thing that we noticed. Why is everyone getting blood pressure? Why are all the wastelines expanding? Why are we getting diabetes in younger and younger people? And heaven forbid, in children. You know, this diabetes, type 2 diabetes was a maturity onset diagnosis. It was older people whose systems had worn down, and now we're getting it in really young people and people who look slim and don't understand where they've gone wrong. So we were seeing all sorts of things. I mean, I'll just go back through it, but we were seeing a lot of gastric reflux and a lot of cardiovascular diseases, autoimmune diseases, cancers, Alzheimer's, arthritis, mental health disorders. I mean, I can just very quickly explain very briefly how these are all being brought about by these ultra-processed foods. We're eating so many carbs now because the food manufacturers and everyone was told to go low fat, and they jumped at that chance. They made us food that was low fat, they made it high carb, they had to put taste back in because you take the taste out when you take the fat out, so they had to put in artificial taste, and they basically gave us so much concentrated carbohydrate in our food that our bodies have nowhere to put that, and so guess what, it dumps it as fat. That's the saturated fat that gets dumped in the body, that goes up in high levels in the blood and also gets dumped in your liver. Your liver expands, and that's one of the reasons for the waistline. Also, when you cross your own personal fat threshold, you actually start to dump the fat around your organs, and it becomes toxic, very inflammatory. So we then become we overdo our insulin system, insulin that people know we need in order to keep our blood sugar level in the blood. But we overdo it, so we end up becoming resistant to it. The levels go up so high that it doesn't work anymore. And that's how the diabetes comes about, when the blood sugar system breaks down and we're no longer able to control that blood sugar in our blood vessels. And because of the damage that sugar does to the lining of the blood vessels, we have cardiovascular diseases. And we thought it was a build-up of cholesterol. It's not. I mean, the cholesterol gets trapped in the system because the fat carriers get damaged by the glucose, by the inflammation, by the oxidation. So we also have problems with leaky gut, which I think other people will explain about, because we're actually getting a lot of these extra things the food manufacturers put into our food are damaging the lining of our gut and allowing proteins through, so we're getting autoimmune diseases as well. And we can't control the metabolism in our brains anymore, which is why we're getting Alzheimer's, because we're actually unable to use the glucose in our brains because we've damaged that insulin system so much. So we're swimming in glucose, not able to use it, and the brain is actually shutting down through lack of fuel. And that's a very big part of Alzheimer's. We're not getting the right fats anymore, so children aren't able to build their brain structure, and that's really worrying from the point of view of dyslexia and dyspraxia and autism disorders. And cancers are feeding on glucose, so if you give them a very glucosey environment with lots of sugars and carbohydrates, you feed cancers. You can actually, people have actually done studies where they have put people with cancers onto very low carbohydrate diets, and their cancers regress. And we've had lots of this, you can see there's lots of studies going on about this. So the mental health disorders is a whole other thing. If you have a lot of glucose and carbohydrate in your diet, you actually run your neurotransmitters differently. So you actually become excitatory, which makes you anxious. That will lead to depression. But it actually makes people more aggressive, and it's to do with the pathway called the kynurenine pathway. So one of the things that you can do to calm people down is actually to bring down the level of sugar and carbohydrate and ultra-processed foods in their diet. If you eat proper food, you'll feel full on the fat and on the fibre, and you won't need to keep eating. So also you will also find that weight reduces, and so I can't stress enough that there's lots of different reasons why ultra-processed food is damaging us, but I can explain all the sort of chronic diseases that we see in an epidemic. I can explain them all to at least some extent.
When I was a kid, my parents fed me incredible diets, and I had wonderful food, but I've just in the last 5 minutes learned quite what I've done to my body in the last 30 years since I left home. So thanks for that, Sue. That's really interesting. And you mentioned waistline, and you accidentally said wasteland, and it just made me think about food waste generally. And a lot of people here will be familiar with the idea that we waste a third of the food that we produce. So we waste it in the fields, we waste it in the manufacturing processes, we waste it because it's not sold before it's best before date, and then we throw it away in the home. If you think of obesity as a form of food waste as well, then actually we get to the point where we're throwing away a good half of the food that we're producing. So if anybody tells you at any point that it's not possible to feed the world with organic and agroecological and regenerative types of food, just remember, we're throwing half of the food that we currently produce away. Claire, you were a teacher and a head teacher, and you did something rather magnificent at your school, and I just wonder, before we go into exactly what you did, if you could talk about how you think food affects learning outcomes and behaviour, the well-being of children.
Share the microphone. So I was previously a head teacher in a primary school, and I noticed very early on in that headship how many children were interrupting my business of work. Of course, children are my business of work, but how many were interrupting me by 9:30 in the morning. And I decided to follow 5 children. We had a really good online management system where all of the staff in the school could add to it, but only I could see everything. And it built up a picture of the children, and then I could track to see children's behaviour before 9:30 in the morning. And then 5 children in particular I decided to follow and work with their families, and one of the variables was food. And food was having a significant impact on the mood, the regulation of their emotion, the way in which they were responding to other children. Other children obviously noticed this, and as children we've all been there. We've all either experienced a little bit of that poking, or we've done it ourselves in the playground, and those children then respond to that little bit of triggering from another child in the playground, and then lo and behold they've gone through, the teacher managed to get through my school office secretary, and they're in with me using my electric pencil sharpener as a cathartic way of bringing them back down so that I could then talk to them about what had happened in the morning. So food, as Sue said, really affects your brain, it affects your cognitive development, it affects your emotional regulation. And you can't work with, as well as a teacher, you can't work with children that are either hungry or undernourished. in some way, and ultra-processed food is undernourishing our children and not equipping them for learning.
Thanks so much. I find it really interesting because, of course, you can see, so many people, blame kids for having ADHD or all these sorts of things, when actually an awful lot of it comes back to the food that they're eating, the amount of sugars that they're putting into themselves. And as a parent, you notice this, and I've worked as a teacher in the past as well. And completely as you say, you can notice the difference after lunchtime. Could you talk to us about the changes that you made in your school, and also can you just share with us your interview and what you said to your interview panel before you became a head teacher? Because I think that's a rather wonderful place to start.
Thank you. I think when you're young, you're a little bit more ballsy than perhaps you are when you're old. Although going through the perimenopause now, I'm finding I'm getting a bit more ballsy again. But I went for interview for headship, and I was young to be getting a headship, and it was an outstanding school, and they said, right, we're an outstanding school, how could you possibly improve it? And I said, well, you're not outstanding. Anyway, I got the job, so luckily. The thing is, any school that gets outstanding, and anybody here who is a teacher or a parent that understands outstanding is a snapshot. You don't stay outstanding for long. It's like being in a marathon. You run the marathon and you might get your medal, but you don't stay at that level the whole time. So it is a snapshot. I've now forgotten the question that you asked me.
The question was, what did you do at the school?
Oh yeah, okay. So when I arrived at the school, it was I inherited a school in deficit budget. None of this was mentioned at interview, by the way. And the school also didn't have a school kitchen, but it had a massive walk-in storage cupboard that had brilliant resources that were all gathering dust in the cupboard. So I decided, with the help of a couple of governors, that we would put all of the resources into some built-in wardrobes right beside the classroom so that the resources could be used, and we turned the storage cupboard into a kitchen. I was lucky in the school. There was a granddad that had a restaurant. He was a chef, and one of the dads was a chef at the local hotel, and so I said to them, could you help me design the kitchen so that we can actually I can persuade the governors this is a good way of spending the funding we've raised, and we can reuse the kitchen within the community, because we'll have built it for chefs to be able to come in and use it. And so then we put the kitchen in, and then we tendered for good quality food, and the benchmark was, would we eat it as teachers? And would we eat it and feel nourished as teachers? And so if we didn't like the food, we're not prepared to serve it to the children. And that's how we started the kitchen, putting in nutrient-rich food from day one.
Fantastic. And what did you notice when you started doing that? How did it change the behaviour outcomes in the schools and the learning outcomes?
I'd like to say it was absolutely perfect, but obviously you can take a horse to water. Not all of the children wanted to eat the nutrient-rich food, so we had to adapt. And whilst we continued to cook the nutrient-rich food, we brought in a massive salad bar and let the school council decide with the children what would be in the salad bar, so that they did have things that they were prepared to try more often. And one of the big chains, Harvester, they also have big salad bars. So some of the children had been taken to Harvester, and therefore they really were quite encouraged by having the salad bar. So it was slow to have an impact in terms of getting all of the children to eat the food. But in terms of the changes with the 5 children that I followed, working with their families, we discovered, it wasn't the fault of parents. It wasn't a lack of knowledge from parents that was making these children not eat the right thing in the morning. It was children that were taking things out of perhaps a snack cupboard or getting something on the way into school, and they were then serving themselves with food. And one of the things that I think that I learned that had the biggest impact on me was that if we want to make a difference to children's health, we've got to teach the children how to make themselves healthy and sustain that.
Thanks very much. One of the things that people worry about is cost. If you're going to have good food in schools, then it's going to cost more. And certainly when I've spoken to the head teacher or to different schools that my kids have been through, they say, well, we get it from this such and such a place. We just can't afford anymore. But it's not about cost. It's about thinking stuff through. It's about thinking the nutrition through. And I come from the Isle of Man originally. I lived on the Isle of Man for some time. And when I was there, I did 2 series of a show called the Manx Food Programme on Manx Radio, which was the BBC equivalent. And I worked with a chef over there who happened to be working in the local private school, but wouldn't it have been great if he was in the local state sector school? Because state sector kids, so I think we're paying £1.20 a day for their meals at that time. This is 10, 15 years ago. And the chef at the private primary school, his mission was to change the way that they produce food and the food that they had in order to deliver some of the outcomes that you were talking about there, Claire. And he had to do it within £1 a day. That was his mission. And by the time that he'd implemented the system, he was doing good food, he was doing healthy snacks that were produced in the kitchens in the school morning and afternoon. He was doing a 3-course meal for the kids at lunchtime with a choice, and there was a constant food bar that was there available for the kids at any time that they wanted to come, all for less than £1 per child. And I think that's just remarkable, just by thinking this stuff through and starting to sort of come back to the bare bones, rather than just buying in stuff that's been processed and mass produced for companies. I wonder, Helen, if you could talk to us about the gut microbiome and how ultra-processed foods drive food intolerance and disease specifically.
Hi everyone, I'm Helen Ross. I'm a registered nutritionist. My business is the Welllife Lab. I specialise in gut health, so help people with irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel diseases, particularly food intolerances. I see a lot, and so I think there's a lot of research showing how ultra-processed foods are detrimental to the gut microbiome. So that's our ecosystem in our intestines. It's the ecosystem of bacteria that live inside our intestines, and ultra-processed foods are known to damage that ecosystem. So they kill off the good bacteria, which allows the pathogenic microbes, which are bad bacteria, to overgrow. And this also has an impact on the gut lining, which is the gut barrier. That's really crucial to our overall health and our immune system. And when we get this damage to the gut barrier, that's when we see it's something called increased intestinal permeability, which is leaky gut, and that's how food intolerances start, like these wider gaps between the cells, which shouldn't be wide, and basically that also starts off autoimmune disease processes and really at the heart of most chronic disease processes.
You're also interested in metabolic health, and that's a phrase, a term that doesn't mean a vast amount to me. So I wonder if you could just sort of talk us through what it is and how ultra-processed foods affect it.
Yeah, so metabolic health is basically our blood sugar regulation. So when we're eating foods that have been stripped of all the goodness, so like with whole grains, the outer husk has been removed and we're just left with a highly refined product. So all white food products like white flour, crisps, it also reduces the fibre in the diet, but it's this impact on our blood sugar levels that causes these spikes and dips in our blood sugar, which leads to weight gain and obesity, insulin resistance, and eventually diabetes, but also most cardiovascular disease processes, as Sue was saying, they're all interlinked, and cancer, nearly all chronic disease processes are between the blood sugar dysregulation and the gut microbiome imbalances. That's really the two key factors.
Thank you. There was a study that I put on our website probably 18 months or so ago now, which was a literature review, a scientific literature review looking at gluten intolerance. And the question it was posing and trying to address was, is there any such thing as gluten intolerance? Are people genuinely gluten intolerant, or are they actually glyphosate, chemical intolerant, because of the things that are being put on the fields, going into the soils, which then go into the foods that people are eating? And I wonder if you can help me with that a little bit, whether you have any views on that, because the last session that we did here was all about the soil and the way that the soil is a living system. If we feed that soil, feed that living system in the right way, it will produce food which is nutritionally fantastic, that we can then eat and then feed ourselves. That there's this sort of this loop, this cycle that we need to be part of. So I wonder if you feel that the way that we farm at the moment is driving the intolerances in our body, and if we can change that, if we can reduce the allergies, the number of, everybody seems to be allergic to something these days, can we address that through the food that we're eating and the way it's produced?
Yeah, so glyphosate or Roundup definitely is a large factor in people's gluten intolerances. And what I often see is people coming to me saying they can't eat gluten or wheat, but when they go to France, for instance, they're absolutely fine eating baguettes and croissants and things. They don't have the same food reaction. So I think there's a link between the farming methods over there in Europe. They're not using the glyphosate as they are here.
Thank you very much. Now, Barbara, lots of questions here to sort of start us off. You run Love Local, Trust Local. There's the website there and the label that many people here might well recognise. Now, you're a farmer, and for a long time you've been concerned about the fact that fewer people are cooking and sourcing real food grown locally. And I just wonder if you could help us with the definition to sort of start us off. What does real food mean? What is real food? And why is local food important?
Hello everybody. Yes, I'm a farmer. I've also been in hospitality for 32 years. And in 2012 I set up my own butchery and farm shop on our family farm. And in 2018, after Open Farm Sunday, I decided that we needed a food label for farmers that the customers knew was produced by real farmers from Britain, and it's all about sustainability and local. I believe real food is higher in quality, it's more nutritious, no additives, no processing, just direct from the farm, totally traceable. I believe real food is higher quality. Eating locally means you are eating in the seasons, which is really important. You're investing in your communities, supporting your local producers. It is care for the environment and lowering carbon footprint, which is less pollution. It's obviously fresher and it's got more flavour and obviously quality.
Thank you. Now, obviously, ultra-processed food comes from factories, and those factories can be anywhere. So when we're talking about real food and local food, what we're talking about is, it's raw ingredients. It's, it's meat direct from the farm, it's vegetables direct from the farm, or herbs, or whatever else it happens to be, that you're then sort of taking as raw ingredients in your home to create into something else. And so I just wonder if you could sort of talk us through your label, where it came from, how it's grown, and how it's helping to address the problems that you sort of set out there for us, Barbara.
How many of you here knew it was Open Farm Sunday last weekend? It was the third time we've done it on our family farm. We had about 3,000 to 4,000 people through the farm gates last week. Love Local was created, as I said, in 2018 because I felt that the public did want to support us as farmers and food producers, but they didn't know what to trust anymore in the supermarkets. The corruption of the supermarkets, of fake labelling, obviously reprocessing, wrapping food in the Union Jack for the customer to think it was produced by British farmers. and it's wrong. Our farmers need support right now. We need to feed you all, and our farmers need that support back. I can tell you, we're on our knees as farmers and food producers. We need to feel loved. And last week, I honestly felt all the farmers that helped us really came home feeling loved by everybody. You only have to turn on your televisions at the moment and listen to the news to hear how vulnerable we are. If you don't have food on your tables, you haven't got anything. And right now, food is the most important thing that we need to live. And water, of course. But I do feel Love Local, Trust Local is a label that we need to get out to the public to realise it is produced by local people, local farmers, and for the public to realise they are supporting British and local.
And where can people find your label?
Well, obviously we're a growing movement. We work closely now with people like Health and Kindness, John and Barbara up there, which please go and talk to them. Obviously
wave your hands.
Yeah, wave your hands, John. I've linked up strongly with Claire in the last few couple of months. It's all about, and like this, where we're sat right now, it's all about people connecting, working together. There is some amazing work happening in local communities, but there needs to be a connection with us all. And to meet like we are now and talking to you all, working together as a team, is really crucial, especially right now.
Open Farm Sunday is a fabulous thing. It happens once a year where you're able to go on to farms where the farm gate is opened, you're able to go and find out about your food. One way of thinking about Love Local, Trust Local, this label, is that it's creating Open Farm Sunday 365 days of the year. It's giving people the opportunity to find that local food, to identify those local farmers. And if you're buying this food in markets, of course, you're able to talk to those people. If you go around the food festival today, you're able to talk to the farmers and producers that are actually growing that food and producing that food. So it's such an important thing. And you mentioned the way in which farmers need support at the moment. And these are some statistics that I used in the last session, that farmers look after 70% of the British Isles, okay? They're producing food, they're delivering for nature, to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the farm. But if we want to restore nature, if we want to restore our soil health and our gut microbiome and all these things, we need farming to be able to support that, and we need to be able to fund it. Now, farming gets, to manage those 70% of the British Isles, 0.2% of government spending, 0.2%, okay? So when we're thinking about that stat I gave you at the beginning of nearly £270 billion per year, just going on dealing with the impact of ultra-processed foods, when we're talking about the amount that goes to farmers, it's about 3 billion. It costs 11 billion simply to administrate central government, okay? Not councils or anything else, just central government. It's nothing. And so farmers really need your support in order to produce that food, and they need you to talk to any government people, any councillors, any opportunity to sign petitions about increasing the amount of funding, increasing the support that goes to farmers is really critical. But then you as customers going out and sourcing your food from labels like this, that's really important too. Now I'm going to ask you a slightly spikier question, which is about how we define local food, because of course local food can come from your local regenerative farm, or it can come from the intensive farm that happens to be next door, the one that still keeps chickens in cages and that sort of thing. So what I wonder is whether you define local food in any way in relation to how regenerative it is, how conventional it is, whether you think at all about how that food is delivering positive environmental or welfare outcomes.
Okay, well, obviously for me, it's really important that we all understand we only produce 60% of our food as a country here in England. We are a growing population, but I do believe that local food production can be achieved both through intensive and regenerative approaches. Intensive farming is high food production at low costs, which is what the consumer expects, cheap food. Regenerative farming, of course, is working with natural systems, and they need more land to achieve the yields which are comparable with obviously the high production. It's trying to get the balance, and we all need to work together because we need to have food on the table. I personally am terrified at what's going on in the world, and obviously we need to feed, we need to have food, and it's to get the balance. We are sixth generation of farming family on our own family farm, and you know, we want to look after nature. The wildlife on our farm is incredible at the moment, and I know that we're doing a good job because it's there. It wouldn't be there. The amount of hares and venison and wild hawks and everything. There was 2 otters swimming up the river. Well, that means our river system is really clean. Although when I put it on social media the other day, the hate for otters was immense. I was really upset. But honestly, as farmers, we want to preserve nature, and we also want to grow food. I really get frustrated that the farmers are being paid to grow, you know, wild flowers all the time. You know, it's getting the balance and trying to keep both of it going hand in hand.
And I think one of the other things that's really important is the different labels say different things. So the Love Local, Trust Local is about making sure that, you know, the farmers in your local economy are supported, and those farmers are an essential part, a cog in that machine of the local economy. And so, you know, really important to try and find those really good local producers, and at the same time then look out for other labels, you know, Pasture for Life certified or organic certified or other things as well, if those are the things that interest you. So lots of different things. Food, obviously we all eat 3 times a day, and snacks in between. So, you know, this is something that we can really make a difference with. Now we've got 3 or 4 more questions here before I hand it over to you guys. But Claire, I wondered if I could just sort of come back to you and think about, you know, when I go home from here tonight, I won't have been slaving over a hot stove all day. I could just go to Morrison's and get a ready pizza with some garlic bread. It'd keep the kids happy. It would save me some time. We've become so reliant on these ultra-processed foods, these ready meals, and easy to cook, you know, sort of semi-prepared meals. How do we change that?
That's an essay question in itself. Firstly, I would say get curious, be curious, look at the food that you're going to buy. Does it look like food? Is it real food? The food, even the food that we buy, like just say for example a carrot. If you look at a carrot and you bought the carrot from a supermarket, the nutrient density in that carrot will be different to the nutrient density in the carrots from a local farm. You won't have the same quality. So get curious with your food. If you have time to go and explore, don't necessarily rely on your local supermarket. Go and find your local growers. Go and find your allotments, see if they sell food. Go and find the people that have got small market gardens and are growing food for you. Go and find anything with a Love Local sticker that has been looked at by Barbara, and ask them questions. Anybody that's here today that you see that's got food or is growing plants that then can, you know, if you're a better gardener than me, will actually turn into food. Go and ask them, where did they get it from? Where did it start? What's the origin of that? What's the provenance? So I think curiosity is key. I'm going to stick with the C's and then say classrooms are another place that we should be concentrating on. What are our children learning? I think that they deserve to understand from a very young age how to live well for longer, and that we should be engaging with the classrooms. If you have time on your hands and you know how to grow, then maybe volunteer at the school and say, look, I could probably help with your veg garden. A teacher will be willing to come and be alongside you, and you'll be teaching the teacher at the same time as teaching the children, which then obviously is going to have a big knock-on effect. So if you are retired and you have a little bit of spare time, my grandparent army was one of the best armies in my school. that really helped to support the children to understand where the food was coming from, and they absolutely loved taking things home, that it even got a small shoot coming through that they could take home and nurture. So curiosity, classrooms, be conscious about what you're putting in. We all rely on the cheap food from time to time. It's part of convenience, it's part of our lifestyles, but be conscious about it as a consumer and make up for it with other food that you can have later in the week. If you have time on your hands, do some of that cooking and set yourself up, plan ahead. Know if you've got a really busy week, plan ahead and put some of that in place. So I think curiosity, classrooms, conscious consumption, and connection. Eat food with somebody else. Go and connect with the food that you've created and go and connect with somebody else and enjoy that food and be mindful about the food and celebrate the food and celebrate the connection with others.
Thanks very much. I'm going to add a couple of extra C words there as well. I've got to keep it clean, but anyway. So the other ones that I wanted to add were consumers versus citizens. And you know, when I go to a policy conversation with government, or you go and you have a conversation with food companies, they will talk about consumers. It makes us sound like a swarm of locusts. We have no responsibility as consumers, whereas citizens, we have a very different level of responsibility. It conjures a very different thing. As food citizens, we might make different choices. And that issue of, does it look like food? I think that's a really important thing to sort of ask ourselves, and how to sort of build up the diversity. It's really easy just to eat pasta every day. When I was at college, I did a drama degree first of all, and for the first year I was working 14 hours a day, and I would come home and I would come back to the student residence and I would eat either noodles with a can of sweet and sour sauce or noodles with a can of tomato sauce, and that was all because I just wanted the calories, and I ate lots of Mars bars. But does it look like food? How do you get diversity? Diversity in the type of meals that you eat, diversity within that plate, different colours, different ways of cooking. That's how you get that range of nutrition coming into you as well. Now, I've just talked about my awful diet that I had as a student, but we know full well what the foods are that are frankly crap. We know the things that aren't good for us. We know that sugary drinks and pizzas and crisps are a nightmare. Why do people keep eating them, and how do we stop it?
People keep eating them because they're made to be addictive. They're manufactured in a way to satisfy the reward centres in the brain, the dopamine receptors. And it's very difficult to stop. So for teenagers, for example, to stop them eating it. So really it needs to come down to more education in schools, but also it's government policies like the stricter food labelling and even outright bans on ultra-processed foods, which they've just done in Spain. They've banned ultra-processed foods from all schools and education centres. So I think we should all be following suit there.
Thank you. And just the last one before we go across to the audience. So ultra-processed foods are making people unhealthy and depressed, but let's look at it from the other side. We like them. They're nice. We quite enjoy them. They do all those things that you've just talked about. They appeal to those senses. Why shouldn't we eat them if we want to?
I think it's actually to do with what you were saying, Helen, about them being very addictive. And what's becoming very apparent now is that there is a new class of substance misuse addiction. So you think about alcohol, you think about tobacco, you think about drugs that people take. Actually, people are using ultra-processed food in that way. And in fact, there is a conference now of food addiction. There was the first one was last year, and they're having another one again this year, and they're actually campaigning to get not food, but ultra-processed food recognised as a substance misuse. So we've got to be really careful in the same way that we have to be careful about other, overdoing the tobacco or the alcohol or whatever. We've got to be really careful. The trouble is, everyone has to eat. So, you know, you can't just suddenly stop eating. And the best way to deal with an addiction is actually abstinence. But you can't just stop eating. What you can do is decide to stop eating ultra-processed foods. You can actually go for just the real foods. And a lot of problems that young people are having with food, a lot of the disorders, eating disorders, actually start to melt away if you don't give them ultra-processed foods. So I think we do have a responsibility. It's not, of course, nobody's suggesting that we should, it would be great if everyone moved to real food completely, but no one's suggesting that that's going to happen now in this environment. But we can all look at what we're eating and cut back, and maybe think about how we can have real food instead of the ultra-processed food, how we can actually choose better in everyday life.
Thank you. In the last session we were talking about soil and nutrition and the way in which regenerative farming is trying to sort of take over from mainstream conventional farming, where you're reducing or eliminating the inputs that are going into that soil that are then being used to produce food. And it's the same, isn't it, for humans? That we're not talking about going cold turkey. That it's not about just suddenly trying to change everything. It's about trying to identify those changes that you can reasonably make in your own lives, and then having made those changes, then think about the next thing you can do, the next thing you can do. We've got about 10 minutes or so for questions. Does anybody have a question that they'd like? You've got a panel here of fantastic experts, and so I would love it if people ask the questions that they generally have. This is for the end, and I'm going to just try and get you a microphone. So that everybody can
kneel down.
And if you know who you want to ask.
Probably to Sue, I think. So I understand real foods and I try and be healthy and get real foods. I'd even noticed in pre-packaged things like chicken breast, which are clearly chicken breast real food, and when I turn over and see ingredients I expect to see just chicken, I'd also note lots of chemicals. Is that classed as processed food because it's got chemicals in? And is that doing us harm eating that because it's got those chemicals in?
So some people would say that an ultra-processed food is when you turn it over and you've got sort of more than just a couple of ingredients, and at least one of them is not something that you would have in your store cupboard at home. So the things that have been added to these foods, it started off very benignly in order to help us preserve food and in order to give food a shelf life. And of course we need that in our system, but now it's gone beyond the pale. They're adding a lot of fillers and starches and different flavour enhancers and whatever, and they're not for you. You know, this isn't for your benefit. This is in order to keep the food going for longer, like the famous lettuce that Liz Truss was compared to, and it's all. They do have knock-on effects. Helen was talking about that effect of the gut, you know, and these different things that are added to our foods. Yes, they do all have important problems, and they're not tested. So some of them are GRAS, they're GRAS, they're generally regarded as safe. They haven't been through a testing process. There are lots of examples of things that are carcinogenic, which are in our food supply, and we don't know about it because it's just slipping in under the regulation. So yes, if you've got the chance to go and get your chicken from the farm, or you've got it and it's got a whole load of stuff in it, yes, be very wary of the extra stuff.
As a farmer, I would just like to say, farmers' food does not contain anything. When it leaves the farm gates, it's fresh, it's local. When it leaves the farm, God knows what else it goes onto it after it's left us. A loaf of bread should not be lasting you 6 to 7 weeks, okay? All this food which is being imported at the moment from America, all these deals that they've signed us up to, chlorinated chicken is washed in chlorine because it's got salmonella. In England, our farmers have to, vaccinate our chicken. We don't have the problems of all these imported food. Our farmers in Britain have the highest welfare standards in the world. We are not allowed to use growth hormones. We are not allowed to use antibiotics, and you must remember that. So please support your British farmers.
Thank you. And I'm just going to add a couple of things there. I was reading a study, it's just about carrots, and I forget the exact multiples, but I'm going to give you a sense of it anyway, because it's more or less right, where a carrot from a conventional system was producing X amount of nutrition, which wasn't an awful lot. Then a carrot that was coming from an organic system was 7 times the nutrition in that carrot. But then from a regenerative system, which is really working with soil processes, it was more than 20 times the levels of nutrition. Now, there's a real challenge here because, you know, we all care about price. Price really matters to an awful lot of people. It really matters to government. And yet, we really need to try and source that local food, that regeneratively grown food, as well as we can. And it's about those soil processes. It's, if you can work out where that food has come from, if you can understand the processes that are there, that you can talk to that farmer. I mean, this is a luxury, I know, but it's about trying to find the food that has the most nutrition, because we can all eat carrots, but the nutritional value of one carrot is not the same as another. And just in terms of chicken, you know, if we think about chicken, it's a jungle bird. If that bird has grown up and been slaughtered within 39 days, which is the average life of a meat chicken, and it's been in an intensive system where it's essentially had an A4 piece of paper